America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation. And today we are joined by our very good friend and colleague, Karen Harned, who is the president of Harned Strategies, LLC, a legal, regulatory, and public affairs consulting firm. Karen has over 35 years of legal, policy, and public relations experience. Karen, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's always great to see you. Well, you're the regulatory guru. So, of course, everything regulations, I always come and talk to you about. And I know we're only, what are we? We're not quite, are we 90 days? We're 90 days into the Trump administration. And I always say that one of the few things that got a lot of publication and it was the least talked about was Trump's deregulation policies during his first Trump administration. Take us back to that and tell us, walk us through what he accomplished.
Yeah, he really, a lot of the reason that the economy did so well under Trump, it was the tax cuts, but it was also his deregulatory agenda. Prior to him coming, people may not remember, and honestly now it's even worse this time around, we saw Obama with just flooding the zone with new regulations. And a lot of small business owners, they weren't even sure which ones were going to apply to their business, but they were very concerned that something was going to happen. They didn't know what it was. And that created a lot of uncertainty. It created a lot of stress because, as you know, small business owners are disproportionately impacted by the impacts of regulation on them. So Trump not only took his feet off the gas, he implemented deregulatory policies. I've never seen a Federal Register, that is where we find all of our proposed rules, so small for so long. And to the extent it was filled with rules that were undoing mandates on business, not putting new ones on them. And that was a refreshing change, to be sure.
Yeah. And for people who don't sort of understand what we mean when we say regulations, I always like to call it just red tape. So imagine yourself having to, cut through the red tape on a daily basis and how much of a time, it's like a time suck. It's like the waiting room of, where you're just sitting there and it's taking all your time to comply with rules and fill out paperwork and pay fees. That just think of the what is it? The auto tag agency when you go to get your auto tags. It's like that, the waiting room, right?
Correct. And that is, for small business owners, you're pointing to the biggest issue, which is the paperwork burden. And there, regardless of, we all have to deal with the IRS, small businesses do in spades, but then, depending on the industry you're in, you're going to have a bunch of other forms that you're going to have to fill out. And again, Trump really sought to undo a lot of that and also just the underlying regulations that were there too. I remember talking to a small business owner that was having to go through post 9/11. He personally, as the business owner, had to spend 36 hours of his time going through a computer program issued by the Department of Homeland Security to get some certification that he could not have if he did not do that. And he could not delegate it to anybody else on his staff. He had a bigger staff. It was 130 people, I believe. So there's all these little things, depending on what industry you're in, that you're also getting hit with. But Trump's a business owner. He remembers this. The way he talks about regulation is as somebody that has been regulated and did not like it. And so that's why I feel like he's been so effective in his deregulatory efforts.
And what I read after sort of the postmortem on his first term was that he had committed coming in to getting rid of 2 regulations for every 1 new regulation. And in the end, it was about 8 that he got rid of for every new regulation during his term. And I know that he also passed issued an executive order, he issued an executive order saying that he would commit to getting rid of 10 regulations for every new regulation across the whole government. That's pretty aggressive on his part, but what do you think about that? You think that's doable?
Well, I do think it's doable because I have been a strong proponent of getting rid of the regulatory underbrush. I mean, they've been asked repeatedly, the federal government, to say how many regulations are on the books, and they cannot do it. They can't do it. They don't know. And there's a lot out there that hasn't been enforced in decades. Can we at least get rid of that? Because if you get one inspector that doesn't like you, they're just going to, go digging through the files to find something that they can knock you on. In addition, I mean, he's also going after the big ones, and he's, it's interesting this time around because he's not just doing it through the traditional rulemaking process, and he's definitely going to be doing that. But he's also looking at regulations that Job Creators Network has, said are illegal, like the SEC climate disclosure rule. His Department of Justice, his acting Solicitor General, has said to the court, we are not defending this rule. We think it's illegal. We think the Securities Exchange Commission was over their skis on this one, and we're not going to defend it. They are doing that in a number of instances too. So then the courts, are going to be relying on whoever's intervening, typically environmental groups in a case like that, to make the case for it. So this rule does require, it's currently stayed, but it would require all publicly traded companies to report and guess what their greenhouse gas emissions are every year. And, that's going to require them to talk to their small business suppliers and have them guesstimate. Again, this is a Securities Exchange Commission. This isn't the EPA. So not really clear on how they even have the statutory authority to do this, which is why, again, I think the Trump administration isn't defending the rule. But that's going to also help because you're going to get, hopefully, good court decisions because you're going to have less, good advocacy for it if you've got the government saying it doesn't even have authority to do this, and maybe stop these things from coming around the next time too.
So I know that one more question on that one. If these companies that are publicly traded, so now we're thinking about big corporations, right? But when you say they're going to have their small business, their suppliers, which are potentially small business owners, measure their gas emissions, so they're basically able to sort of push that cost down to the small business owner.
Right. And that's another way that small businesses are really impacted by regulation is if they're doing business with bigger firms that, maybe that small business is exempt from the regulation, but the firm is not, that they're working with, the bigger business, like a Walmart or whoever it might be. And, but they're still regulated, which is why one of the things that Job Creators Network has been advocating for is having the agencies be required to look at indirect costs because those are really real for small businesses. And, when the Securities Exchange Commission issued that rule, they said, we didn't go with phase 3, which would have directly required small businesses to also do that reporting. But a quick Google search revealed that Ernst & Young and KPMG were advising all of their big businesses to start asking their suppliers, no matter what size, for the information. So again, small businesses do get the push down effect of a lot of this regulation.
Mm-hmm. Rolls downhill, right?
Yeah.
So big Supreme Court case last year at the end of the Biden administration, the Chevron case. Tell us what that case was about and what the impact of the decision will be.
Right. So starting in the 80s, there was a decision that the Supreme Court had issued that said, whenever there's a question about what a statute means, which anybody that has been following the news knows there's lots of questions about that because Congress isn't really that great at writing laws, especially now, that the agency that is charged with implementing that statute gets the benefit of the doubt. Whatever they say it means, whether it's a definitional thing or who it applies to, the agency gets to basically pick, right? And they're going to get a deference from the judges in courts if somebody were to challenge that regulation as something that the agency is doing beyond its authority or not in keeping with what Congress intended with the statute that they're trying to implement. And the practical effect of that is that groups like Job Creators Network and a lot of other advocacy groups and trade associations really did not challenge regulations as much as they otherwise could have because they knew going in that the deck was stacked against them, that the thumb was on the scales for the agency. Well, last year in a case called Loper Bright, the Supreme Court said, you know what, this is not working. This has created a big administrative state. We need to be, and they're also textualists. So they're like, this isn't even following our, looking at the law and figuring out what it means. Like everybody should be given a fair shake. Judges are supposed to be judges. They need to decide. They need to look at the arguments that the challengers of a regulation say at the same way that they're looking at what the agency does. And so that is huge because it brings new life into our ability to challenge moving forward. Plus, for a lot of regulations that are already on the books, that received Chevron deference, it was called Chevron deference before, maybe those don't deserve that deference anymore. Maybe the decision would have come out differently otherwise. So there are a lot of groups, including job creators, that are looking for those opportunities to wind back some other regulation. In fact, that's another good Trump example. He's even said during an executive order, I want all my agencies to look and see what regulations have been upheld under Chevron deference and, pull those back. So that is another great task that he has given on the deregulatory front to his agencies.
So the realistic impact of that is that when Congress writes a law, they actually have to, for all intents and purposes, to do their job. Like they have to determine, and I don't mean to be facetious, but doing their job when they're writing a law means, point A applies to B, C, and D. This law applies to these organizations or these businesses who do these things in this way. Like they have to be that specific because now the agencies don't get to just interpret the law and say, well, we think it should apply to, and what did they usually probably say? Everybody. Right. Because it's easier for them.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. They've had their cake and get their cake and eat it too, and it's funny that you say they have to do their job because I think you remember one of the first actions after the Supreme Court decided the case was Elizabeth Warren introduced a bill to reinstate Chevron deference. It's like, wait a second. The whole point of this is that you guys are supposed to be the ones legislating, not the agencies. And you're affirmatively saying you don't want to do your job by promoting this legislation.
So what's the reason why Democrats would want to not be specific in their laws? Is it because they know that the regulatory state, broadly will be so broad it'll just pull everybody in? Is that what they're looking for?
Yeah, I think that, and they also know the regulatory state is filled with a bunch of people that agree with them and are for more regulation, honestly. And they're going to be able to do things through the agencies that they're never going to get through Congress. Again, as you recall under Obama, after Congress said absolutely not on the Clean Power Plan, he did it anyway with EPA. Biden did it with student loans. Every time, at every turn, when Congress says no, the agencies are going to say yes. And I think the Democrats are counting on that. And then even the Republicans, I have to say, kind of like it because then it's not their fault, right? And they have a bad person to beat up on, even if it's a law they voted for.
Sure.
And so, but I would say, more often than not, it's the Democrats that feel like they're going to get the better end of the bargain if they're able to give that power to the agencies.
Well, on the student loan front, there's actually been a lot of news about it. I know that they've effectively ended all of the student loan bailout programs. The Trump administration, what the Biden administration was trying to do through the Department of Education to forgive all of these loans. And I know that they've started to require the payments to start back up. But it doesn't change like the sort of the underlying problem with student loans, obviously, is that we want to get the student loan, we want to get the government out of the business of student loans, right? I mean, isn't that really the goal, is to get the government out of student loans?
Well, I mean, I share your opinion. I think so. I mean, it has been a disaster ever since they've taken it over. We've seen it grow at exponentially higher cost of inflation than any other thing in the market, as far as I know of. And also, that I was just reading something the other day, actually, that interest rates have gone up ever since the federal government has taken it over, that our interest rates as borrowers of student loans were lower prior to the government taking it over. So I think it's been a complete disaster. And I'm hoping that the Trump administration will try to work, with Congress to give that, to take that authority back or away from the feds.
Well, and tell me if I'm wrong on the history of this, but from what I recall, when the student loans were, when the banks were kind of cut out of the student loan business, which makes no sense to me, but when they were cut out, it was under Obama, and it was part of Obamacare, and that's why they took it up to the federal level. And that's why the interest is higher on those loans, because guess what they were using the interest payments to pay for? Obamacare.
Yeah. No, this was, I had forgotten the tie to Obamacare, but I definitely remembered that Obama was the culprit here. This was another one of his legacy bills like Obamacare that really just, crushed us.
But it's crushing people who don't deserve to be crushed, and they don't know who they're being crushed by.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They're being crushed because a massive healthcare bill that was full of red tape and bureaucracy was passed in the dead of night with backroom deals, the Cornhusker deal and all that stuff. And you know this intimately because you were part of the team that, took it up to the Supreme Court. But it was being paid for on the backs of these, some of it, at least it's so big, it's not just that, but they were looking to pay for it any way they could. And they are paying for it on the backs of these students who now saw organizations like us who were trying to, stop these student loan bailouts, that were illegal, but they saw us as the bad guys, when in reality, the reason why they're in such bad shape is because of how it was handled under the Biden administration, or Obama-Biden administration. I mean, that's essentially it, right?
No, that's exactly right. And that's why the cost of, education, higher education has just really, become beyond the reach of many people, or just saddles them for forever, where they can't even get a home because they're still paying off their student debt. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just really insane and needs to be corrected. And I hope it will be.
I do too, because in the end, I know we said this when we when we filed litigation on the student loan. I do feel sorry for these people. I don't look at it and say, that you took out the loan, you pay the bill. I mean, these people are paying 9, 10, 11, 12% in interest payments. I mean, they will never get out from under these bills. In some cases, the interest is growing faster than the principal, and it's growing in spite of them paying the payments. Like, that's criminal that these loans are like this. I mean, there has to be a solution. It has to be done legislatively, where I don't understand why Democrats and Republicans can't come together and say, how do we help these people pay off their loans, but not pay, 10, 11, 12% in interest rates?
Yeah, I agree. I know it is becoming such a problem that maybe this is one area where we could get some bipartisan agreement. Hope springs eternal.
For sure, for sure. A couple more questions on regulations. Under the Biden administration, we saw about $2 trillion in new regulatory burdens. A lot of it was under the whole the new Green Deal type policies, when it comes to all of the EPA and the EV cars, and moving us off of gasoline power cars to EV cars within, like 60% of our fleet was going to have to move in the next like 9 years or something like that. What was the you know um, what was the impact of that level of regulatory burden on America, on our economy and our small businesses?
Right. Well, I think it's been extremely harmful. I mean, I know the wholesaler distributor community has really suffered under that because of, they were even imposing it on heavy duty trucks, and that's not even possible. I mean, the battery would take up so much space that was normally used for freight. The charging stations we all heard that were going to come never did. It really, it also just killed us on energy, right? I mean, our domestic energy was wonderful after Trump left office. And it just went into the tank as a result of, picking winners and losers here. And the losers were anybody that wasn't electric vehicle or electrically, charged, type of energy source. And so those energy costs are so significant for small businesses. They are definitely one of their highest cost drivers. I think it's in the top 10 of the things they have to pay for. And so that policy just was a killer on just the cost alone. And so the fact that we're unleashing domestic energy production again under Trump, I am confident will really help, because that everything from food to driving your cars, to everything that you can think of, it runs on energy, and that really did drive up the cost. That wasn't just even regulations. That was just, I mean, it was regulations, but the practical effect was seriously just cost.
How does DOGE, how does that fit into dismantling the regulatory state?
Well, I think, they are truly looking under the hood and finding a lot of waste. So I think, one of the newest things actually just today came out was a proposed rule in the Federal Register to make it easier to fire certain employees that have policy-making roles in the administration. That's going to be critical, because moving these deregulatory efforts going forward, you need people not resisting that. But I would also just say, like, DOGE is identifying people that aren't even needed, right? Because the government, it turns out, can actually do RIFs like regular businesses. That's, big layoffs. And they are doing that. And DOGE is helping because they're identifying where the waste is. I think there was a report of, I can't even remember how many people at IRS just to set up your phone and your computer for just the employees there. It's just, there's so much, and that you need people like DOGE that can come in and really get, again, under the hood and see what's going on, because it's just so embedded now that, there's no way President Trump could even find it out. His politicals can't even. So DOGE they're not in charge. That, I think, is a myth, but they are making recommendations. They're finding the stuff, and they're telling the politicals that are working directly for Trump, here's where you can look. Here's where you can go. This is what we found. And then that is going to help them as they try to, unwind the regulatory state further.
And how powerful do you view the regulatory state? I mean, I know we say we have 3 co-equal branches of government, but where does that regulatory state fit in as far as its impact? Do you really think we all joke and kind of say it's the 4th branch of government, but is it really?
Yes, I really do think so. Honestly, uh, it was created back during the New Deal, or like really expanded during the New Deal, and it just has become. I mean, it's over 2.1. Um, well, I can't remember. It's a lot of employees, like uh, federal employees that we have right now that aren't even the military or even the postal service.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the bottom line I see from it is when people are concerned about how um, what rules are impacting them, they're not appreciating the fact that, or policies, that most of them really are coming out of the agencies. They're not coming out of Congress or even the president himself. They're coming out of these bureaucrats and these mandates that are coming through the regulations. And so that really needs to be corrected, because it's hard to fight the person that you don't even know who they are. Or the mandate, you don't even know where it came from. And so we need to rebalance this so that there's more transparency and accountability of who's making the rules and the laws that you're having to comply with, that you're complaining about every day.
That's a great point. I wanted to ask that because I know we joke all the time about it being the fourth branch of government, but it really does impact our small businesses and how they can operate, or not, for that matter. So, and then I know there's contradictions. Sometimes one agency can contradict another agency because of their rules, and the small business owner is kind of caught in the middle. Like, well, who's more important? Are you, Mr. Bureaucrat on this team, more important than this bureaucrat on this team? Who do I listen to? And I've had some small business owners tell me that. So it is a difficult spot for them to be in.
Yes, absolutely. I've heard those stories as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Karen, thank you for taking the time to sit down with us again. I love having you on and kind of getting the update and the skinny on regulations and Washington, D.C. in general. And thank you all so much for taking the time to tune in on Main Street Matters, America's Small Business Megaphone. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can find the audio version anywhere you get your podcast from, and you can watch the show on the Job Creators Network channel on YouTube and Rumble. Goodbye for now.